The Discovery. Zaloth's sleek scout ship sliced through the inky void of space, rapidly approaching the pale blue marble the humans called Earth. This was far from his first surveillance mission to this seemingly backward planet, but as he watched the world swell in his view screen, he couldn't shake the sense that something was different this time. The humans had always confounded Zaloth's people, the Zephyrians. Their technology was crude, their sciences rudimentary, their cultures fractious and illogical. And yet, there were anomalies, flashes of insight, glimpses of knowledge and capabilities that far outstripped the humans' apparent level of development. Most of Zaloth's superiors dismissed these as flukes, but he wasn't so sure. As his cloaked vessel took up a geosynchronous orbit, Zaloth powered up his sensors and settled in to watch and listen, just as he had 100 times before. But he had barely begun his scans when something caught his attention. A massive energy surge, deep in the human territory called Siberia. Gone almost as soon as it appeared. Frowning, Zaloth checked and rechecked his instruments. If he didn't know better, he would have sworn it was a signature from a warp drive test. But that was impossible. The humans were centuries away from such technology, weren't they? Thus began a surveillance mission unlike any other, one that would lead Zaloth to question everything he thought he knew about the mysterious beings called humans. Hour after hour, day after day, the scout analyzed transmissions, measured energy outputs, spied on military maneuvers and research facilities, and with each new data point, the unease in his heart grew. There was the human female at their Olympic Games, shattering records with speeds and strengths that should have been biologically impossible. The failed experiment at a particle collider that looked suspiciously like a successful test of teleportation. The inexplicable gravitational readings from deep beneath the lunar surface, where no human had ever set foot, or so they claimed. Everywhere Zaloth looked, there were signs that the humans were hiding something profound. Subtle clues and cues that individually meant little but together painted a picture that was as inescapable as it was terrifying. The humans were not what they seemed, not by a long shot. And if Zaloth's growing suspicions were correct, the fate of the galaxy itself might depend on what happened next. Little did he know that the humans were already watching the Watcher. They had detected his ship the moment it arrived, tracked his every movement, analyzed his every transmission, and deep in their secret strongholds, hidden from prying alien eyes, the human leadership was already debating what to do about their uninvited guest. What happened next would be a test of wills between two species, a battle of secrets and lies and truths too shattering to be revealed. A confrontation that could end in enlightenment or annihilation. Digging deeper, the blue-green light of Earth's sole moon bathed the stark, gray walls of the hidden lunar monitor station. Zaloth sat hunched over his console, his clawed fingers flying over the gleaming interface as his eyes darted back and forth across a dizzying flow of data. The secrets he had uncovered thus far were already more than enough to warrant a full report to the Galactic Council, but something told him he'd barely scratched the surface. He had to keep digging. For the 100th time, Zaloth reviewed the strange evidence he'd collected over weeks of tireless surveillance. The anomalous energy readings, the physics-defying Olympic performances, the flashes of impossible technology and knowledge. None of it made sense, at least not for a species that still relied on chemical rockets and fossil fuels. But as he pored over the data, a pattern began to emerge. The humans weren't just hiding a few scattered pieces of advanced tech. They were hiding an entire parallel civilization, one that operated in the shadows of their more visible society. A secret world of unimaginable scientific and technological wonders, shielded from outside eyes by layer upon layer of misdirection and deception. But why? What could drive an entire species to such lengths? The more he delved into the mystery, the more Zaloth realized he was missing some crucial piece of the puzzle, some key that would make sense of the humans' baffling behavior. And he knew there was only one way to find it. With a tightening in his guts that might have been excitement or fear, Xyloth activated his ship's matter transporter and prepared to do something no Zephyrian had ever done: set foot on the surface of the human homeworld. He materialized in a darkened alleyway on the outskirts of a sprawling human city, his form masked by a sophisticated holographic disguise. To any passing humans, he would appear as one of their own, just another face in the teeming crowds. But Xyloth's alien senses were already picking up on 1,000 tiny details that no human could detect. The subetheric hum of hidden power sources, the telltale shimmer of cloaked security drones, the residual tang of exotic particles on the evening breeze. Moving with casual but purposeful strides, Xyloth allowed himself to be swept up in the flow of human foot traffic, just another anonymous figure amid the neon-splashed towers and buzzing maglev trains. But his eyes and ears missed nothing. Every overheard conversation, every stolen glance at a public data terminal, every flicker of unusual energy, he filed it all away, slowly assembling the fragments of a picture too vast and strange to fully comprehend. But even here, amid the everyday bustle of human life, there were hints of something more. A snippet of dialogue about a breakout at a research lab in Hangzhou, a fleeting image on a news feed of a burning structure in the American Southwest, accompanied by baffling references to a containment failure. Whispers of unrest in the highest echelons of power, of a great reckoning that was coming for all humankind. Piece by piece, a new image of humanity was taking shape in Xyloth's mind, but he still had no idea of the true nature or scale of what he was uncovering. And with every new revelation, he found himself being drawn deeper into a web of secrets and lies more vast and ancient than any he could have imagined. The human enigmas. Xyloth reclined in the pilot's chair of his cloaked ship, staring out at the slowly turning blue marble of Earth, but seeing none of it. His mind churned with the weight of the secrets he'd uncovered, the sheer scope of the deception he'd stumbled into. The more he'd learned about the human's hidden nature, the more unsettled he'd become. It wasn't just the inexplicable flashes of advanced technology or the physics-defying feats he'd witnessed. It was the breadth and depth of the lies, the way the entire human civilization seemed to be built around a core of secrets and misdirection. The questions ate at him. How had they achieved this? Why had they done it? And most unsettling of all, what were they planning? Xyloth knew he needed answers, and he wasn't going to find them skulking about in disguise or peering from orbit. He needed to go to the source. He needed to speak to an expert. With a flicker of his long fingers across the ship's control panel, he brought up a shimmering holographic star chart. A few more gestures, and the image zoomed in on a small reddish star at the galaxy's edge. Zephyria. Home. The journey back was a blur. Xyloth's mind, too caught up in the implications of his discoveries to pay much heed to the swirling, dancing lights of hyperspace. By the time his ship settled onto the landing pad at the Zephyrian Institute of Sinology, he was practically buzzing with impatience. He was immediately ushered into the chamber of the Institute's foremost expert on humans, a wizened old Zephyrian named Zorax. The ancient sinologist listened intently as Xyloth laid out his findings, his wrinkled brow furrowing deeper with every revelation. When at last Xyloth fell silent, Zorax leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant. "I had hoped never to hear such things," he murmured. "Hoped that the old stories were nothing more than myths and legends." Xyloth felt a chill run down his spine. "What old stories?" Zorax fixed him with a piercing gaze. "The tales of the ancients, passed down from the dawn of our civilization. They speak of a race of beings, outwardly primitive, but inwardly advanced beyond imagining. A species that hid its true nature, cloaking itself in ignorance and backwardness, while secretly pursuing agendas beyond the comprehension of the younger races." The chill became a cold knot in Xyloth's guts. "You think the humans could be these ancients?" "I think," Zorax said slowly, "that there are too many parallels to dismiss. The hidden advancements, the deceptive facade, the aura of secrets and lies, it all fits the legends too well." His eyes met Xyloth's, and the scout saw something like fear in their depths. If the humans are what you suspect, then none of us may be safe. Xyloth's mind raced. If Zorax was right, if the humans were some impossibly ancient and advanced species, hiding behind a mask of simplicity, then everything he thought he knew was a lie, and the dangers such a species might pose. He thought of the vast energies he detected, the whispers of unrest and containment failures, the half-glimpsed wonders and horrors. A species with such powers, with motives and plans beyond his comprehension. The implications were staggering. Xyloth rose to his feet, a new resolve hardening within him. He had to know the truth, no matter the cost. "I understand," he told Zorax. "But I can't turn back now. I have to see this through. I have to know what the humans are, and what they're planning." The old sinologist gazed at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then go, young Xyloth. Go, and may the spirits of the stars guide your path. But be careful. Be very, very careful. For if the legends are true, you may be delving into matters more perilous than any our kind has ever faced." With those ominous words ringing in his ears, Xyloth strode from the chamber, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. He didn't know what the future held, what terrifying truths he might uncover. But he knew he would not rest until he had pierced the veil of the human enigma and revealed the secret at its heart. Moment of truth. Xyloth's return to Earth was a tense and nerve-wracking affair, every moment fraught with the fear of discovery. He knew he was no longer just an observer. He was an active player in a game of secrets and lies, one with stakes higher than any he'd ever known. But he was determined to see it through. He set his ship down in a remote stretch of the humans' Amazon rainforest, the dense canopy shielding him from prying eyes. From there, he made his way to the sprawling human city called Sao Paulo, once again cloaked in his holographic disguise. But this time, he wasn't just wandering and observing. He had a specific target in mind, a human named Dr. Elena Sanchez, a brilliant scientist with a shadowy past and alleged ties to the humans' most secretive and powerful organizations. If anyone could give him the answers he sought, it was her. Tracking her down was a challenge, even with his advanced technology. She was a ghost, her movements erratic, and her traces well hidden. But Xyloth was nothing if not persistent, and after days of relentless digital sleuthing and physical surveillance, he finally caught a break. A whispered conversation in a dark corner of the net, a fleeting energy signature from a remote compound deep in the Andes. It was all he needed. With his heart pounding, Xyloth set out to confront the enigmatic Dr. Sanchez and demand the truth. He found her in a dimly lit laboratory, hunched over a glowing console that pulsed with energies far beyond any human science he knew. She whirled to face him as he entered, her eyes widening in shock as his disguise flickered and faded. "I know what you are," Xyloth said without preamble. "I know about the secrets, the lies, the hidden truths of your species. And I want answers." To his surprise, Dr. Sanchez didn't try to deny it or flee. Instead, a strange smile crossed her face, a mixture of resignation and relief. "So, you finally came," she murmured. "I knew one of you would, sooner or later. You're too curious for your own good." Xyloth's mind raced. She'd been expecting him. But before he could voice his confusion, Dr. Sanchez was speaking again. "You're right," she said, "about all of it. The secrets, the advanced technology, the hidden agendas. Humanity, we're not what we seem. We never have been." She told him a story then, a tale so outlandish and yet so compelling that Xyloth could do nothing but listen in growing shock and awe. A story of an ancient civilization, one that had risen to heights of knowledge and power beyond imagining, and then, for reasons still unclear, had chosen to step back, to hide. "We realized the dangers," Dr. Sanchez explained. "The risks of advancing too fast, of wielding power we weren't ready for. So we decided to slow down, to let the younger races catch up, while we worked in the shadows to prepare for what was coming. What was coming? Xyloth managed to ask, his voice hoarse. Dr. Sanchez fixed him with a haunted gaze. The great filter, she whispered. The wall that every advanced civilization must someday face. The test that will determine the fate of the galaxy itself. And it's coming, Xyloth. It's coming soon. Xyloth's blood ran cold. The great filter. It was a concept straight out of Zephyrian mythology, a hypothetical barrier that explained why they'd never encountered any civilizations more advanced than their own. But to hear it spoken of as a real and imminent threat. Why are you telling me this? He demanded. Because we need your help, Dr. Sanchez said. Yours and that of every other species in the galaxy. The filter, it's bigger than humanity, bigger than any of us. And if we're going to have any chance of surviving it, of passing the test, we can't do it alone. She held out a hand, her eyes pleading. Join us, Xyloth. Help us prepare. Help us unite the galaxy against the coming storm. Because if we don't, if we fail, then everything we know, everything we are, it will all be lost. Xyloth stared at her outstretched hand, his mind whirling with the enormity of what she was proposing. An alliance with the humans, a joining of forces against a threat he could barely comprehend. It was madness. It was impossible. But as he gazed into Dr. Sanchez's eyes, he saw something there that struck a chord deep within him. A determination, a resolve that mirrored his own. A willingness to do whatever it took, to risk everything, for the sake of all life in the galaxy. And in that moment, he knew what he had to do. Slowly, almost reverently, he reached out and clasped her hand in his own. I'm in, he said, his voice ringing with a conviction he'd never known before. Let's do this. Let's save the galaxy, together. And as he spoke those words, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders, replaced by a sense of purpose unlike any he'd ever known. He didn't know what the future held, what trials and terrors lay ahead. But he knew he would face them head-on, side by side with the most unlikely of allies, for the sake of his people, for the sake of all peoples, for the sake of the galaxy itself. The chase. No sooner had the words left Xyloth's mouth than all hell broke loose. Alarms blared, consoles flashed, and the very air seemed to shudder with a sudden influx of energy. Dr. Sanchez's eyes widened in a moment of pure, unguarded terror. They're here, she whispered. Xyloth had no time to ask who they were. The lab's door burst inward, reduced to molten slag by a searing beam of red light. Through the smoking hole poured a stream of figures clad in midnight black armor, their faces hidden behind featureless helmets. Each carried a sleek, deadly-looking weapon, all leveled directly at Xyloth and Dr. Sanchez. Step away from the alien, one of them barked, his voice distorted by his helmet speakers. By order of the Terran Defense Council, you are both under arrest for breach of the secrecy protocols. Dr. Sanchez's face hardened. You're making a mistake, she said, her voice calm but laced with steel. This alien is our ally. He's here to help us. We'll be the judge of that. The lead soldier snapped. Now step aside, or we will use force. Xyloth tensed, ready to fight if needed. But Dr. Sanchez caught his eye, a silent message passing between them. Now, she whispered. In a blur of motion, she slammed her hand down on the console. A blinding flash erupted from the machine, flooding the room with searing white light. The soldiers cried out, their weapons discharging wildly as they staggered back, blinded. Run, Dr. Sanchez yelled, grabbing Xyloth's arm. They sprinted for the rear of the lab, energy bolts sizzling past them as the soldiers recovered and gave chase. They burst out into a long, metal-walled corridor, alarms howling all around them. Dr. Sanchez led the way, navigating the maze-like passages with practiced ease. Xyloth followed close behind, his heart pounding, his mind racing. Behind them, the thunder of booted feet grew louder, the shouts of their pursuers echoing off the walls. Xyloth risked a glance back, saw the soldiers rounding the corner, weapons raised. He ducked just as a bolt of searing energy scorched the wall where his head had been a moment before. "In here," Dr. Sanchez shouted, diving through a side door. Xyloth followed, finding himself in a cavernous hangar bay. Sleek, angular craft filled the space, their hulls gleaming under the harsh lights. Dr. Sanchez sprinted for the nearest one, a slim, dart-like ship with swept-forward wings. Xyloth followed, leaping into the open cockpit behind her. The canopy slid shut just as the soldiers burst into the hangar, energy bolts sparking off the ship's armored hull. Dr. Sanchez's hands flew over the controls, the ship's engines whining to life. With a lurch of acceleration, they'd blasted free of the hangar, the G-forces slamming Xyloth back into his seat. They rocketed up into the sky, leaving the jungle compound far behind. But their escape was short-lived. Proximity alerts screamed as a squadron of sleek fighter craft fell in behind them, the distinctive flare of military thrusters. "Hang on," Dr. Sanchez gritted out, wrenching the ship into a stomach-churning dive. The fighters followed, peppering their shields with energy blasts. Xyloth clutched at his restraints, his heart in his throat as Dr. Sanchez hurled their craft through a dizzying series of evasive maneuvers. But the fighters were relentless, hounding them through the upper atmosphere and into the cold blackness of space. No matter how skillfully Dr. Sanchez flew, she couldn't shake them. "We need help," she said, her voice tight. "We can't do this alone." "What about your allies?" Xyloth asked, his mind racing. "The others who know the truth." Dr. Sanchez shook her head. "They're scattered, hidden. It would take too long to reach them." She paused, a look of calculation crossing her face. "But maybe there's another way." With a few quick keystrokes, she brought up a star map on the ship's main display. A series of coordinates flashed on the screen, a distant point near the galactic rim. "Those are the coordinates for your homeworld, aren't they?" she asked. "Zephyria." Xyloth nodded, a sudden understanding dawning. "You want to go to my people for help." "We have no choice," Dr. Sanchez said. "We need allies, and we need them now. Your people are advanced, capable. If we can convince them of the threat, of what's at stake." She let the thought hang, the implication clear. It was a desperate gamble, but what other option did they have? Xyloth took a deep breath, his mind made up. "Do it," he said. "Set course for Zephyria." Dr. Sanchez nodded, her fingers already dancing over the controls. With a bright flare, the ship's warp drive engaged, tearing a hole through the fabric of space-time. As the stars stretched and distorted around them, Xyloth could only hope they would reach his people in time. The fate of not just humanity, but perhaps the entire galaxy, hung in the balance, and he had a feeling their journey was only just beginning. The Council's verdict. The journey to Zephyria was a tense and harrowing one, every moment filled with the fear of pursuit, of discovery. Dr. Sanchez and Xyloth took turns at the controls, pushing the ship's engines to their limits as they raced across the vast expanse of the galaxy. But at last, after days that felt like an eternity, the welcome sight of Zephyria's twin suns filled the view screen. Xyloth felt a wave of relief wash over him as they descended through the planet's atmosphere, the familiar spires and domes of the capital city rising to meet them. Their arrival caused an immediate stir. No sooner had they touched down on the landing pad of the Zephyrian High Council than they were surrounded by a ring of armed guards, their weapons trained on the unfamiliar human craft. Xyloth emerged first, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Hold your fire," he called out. "I am Xyloth of the Galactic Survey Corps. I come with urgent news for the Council." There was a moment of tense uncertainty. Then, slowly, the guards lowered their weapons. "Come with us," their leader said, his tone gruff. "The Council will decide your fate." They were escorted into the heart of the Council chambers, a vast, vaulted space filled with the holographic projections of the Zephyrian leadership. Xyloth stepped forward, Dr. Sanchez at his side, and began to speak. He told them everything: his surveillance of Earth, his gradual uncovering of the human secrets, his confrontation with Dr. Sanchez, and the revelation she had shared. He spoke of the great filter, of the imminent threat it posed not just to humanity, but to all life in the galaxy. As he spoke, he could see the expressions on the council members' faces shift from skepticism to shock to grave concern. When at last he fell silent, a heavy stillness filled the chamber. "These are extraordinary claims," the High Counselor said at last, her voice weighted with worry. "If what you say is true, then the implications are staggering. But how can we be certain? What proof do you offer?" It was Dr. Sanchez who answered, stepping forward with a data chip in her hand. "This contains all the evidence we've gathered," she said. "Sensor logs, energy readings, encrypted communications. It's all there. Examine it for yourselves." The council took the data, poring over it for long, intense hours. Xyloth and Dr. Sanchez waited, the tension mounting with every passing minute. Finally, the High Counselor spoke. "We have reviewed the evidence," she said, her tone grave. "And while much of it is circumstantial, the patterns are too clear to ignore. It appears that the humans have indeed been concealing a great deal, and that the threat of this great filter may be all too real." A murmur ran through the assembled counselors, a mix of fear and disbelief. The High Counselor raised her hand for silence. "The question now," she said, "is what do we do about it? Do we confront the humans openly, demand answers, and a role in their plans? Or do we continue to watch and wait, gathering our own strength in secret?" The debate that followed was fierce and divisive. Some counselors argued for immediate action, insisting that the Zephyrians had a right and responsibility to involve themselves. Others counseled caution, warning that they still knew too little, that acting rashly could doom them all. Back and forth, the arguments raged, until at last the High Counselor called for a vote. The result was close, but clear. "It is the decision of this council," the High Counselor declared, "that we will maintain the status quo. We will continue to observe the humans, to gather intelligence, but we will not reveal ourselves. Not yet." She turned to Xyloth and Dr. Sanchez, her expression a mix of sympathy and steel. "You have done a great service in bringing this to our attention, but for now, our path is clear. We will watch, and we will prepare for whatever comes." Xyloth felt a surge of frustration, of impotent anger. After all they had uncovered, all they had risked, to do nothing. It felt like a betrayal. But as he met Dr. Sanchez's eyes, he saw a glimmer of understanding, of grim acceptance. They had done what they could. The rest was up to fate, and to the decisions of those in power. As they left the council chambers, stepping out into the pale light of Zephyria's twin suns, Xyloth could only hope those decisions would be the right ones. For all their sakes. New Horizons. Xyloth stood at the observation deck of the Zephyrian orbital station, his gaze fixed on the distant gleam of Earth's sun. It had been months since his fateful meeting with the High Council, months filled with frustration, impatience, and a growing sense of dread. The Council had been true to their word. The Zephyrians had continued to watch the humans, to gather what intelligence they could, but they had not acted, not openly. And with each passing day, Xyloth's sense of urgency, of impending doom, had only grown. He heard footsteps behind him, turned to see Dr. Sanchez approaching. She looked tired, worn down by the weight of the secrets she carried, but there was a determined set to her jaw, a fire in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Any news?" Xyloth asked, though he already knew the answer. Dr. Sanchez shook her head. The Council remains committed to their path of non-interference. They believe the risks of overt action still outweigh the potential benefits. Xyloth clenched his fists, feeling the old frustration rise up inside him. "So we just continue to sit and wait, while the great filter looms ever closer." "I didn't say that," Dr. Sanchez said. There was a hint of a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "The Council may be content to watch and wait, but I'm not. And neither, I think, are you. Xyloth felt a sudden surge of hope, of excitement. What are you proposing? Dr. Sanchez leaned in close, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I've been in contact with some of my old allies back on Earth. They're part of let's call it a resistance movement. People who know the truth, who want to do something about it. She met his eyes, her gaze intense. They're planning something, Xyloth. Something big, and they need our help. Xyloth's heart raced. This was it, the moment he'd been waiting for, a chance to act, to make a real difference. What do they need us to do? He asked. Dr. Sanchez grinned, a fierce, predatory expression. They need information, intel on the Council's plans, on Zephyrian capabilities. They need tech, resources, and most of all, they need allies. She held out her hand, an echo of that fateful moment in her lab all those months ago. Are you in? Xyloth didn't hesitate. He grasped her hand, feeling the strength, the determination in her grip. I'm in, he said. Let's do this. And as he stood there, hand in hand with this human who had become his closest ally, his truest friend, Xyloth felt a sense of purpose, of destiny, settle over him. They were embarking on a new journey, one filled with danger, with uncertainty. They would be going against the wishes of his own people, risking everything on a desperate gamble. But he knew, with a certainty that went beyond logic or reason, that it was the right path. The only path. Together, he and Dr. Sanchez would forge a new alliance, a united front against the looming specter of the Great Filter. They would rally the resistance, gather the resources and knowledge they needed. And when the time came, when the filter reared its head and threatened to consume them all, they would be ready. Ready to fight, ready to win. For the sake of humanity, of Zephyria, of every sentient species in the galaxy, failure was not an option. As Xyloth gazed out at the stars, he felt a new fire kindle in his heart, a fire of hope, of determination, a fire that would light the way to a new future, for all of them. The end.